After months of campaigning, Ukraine has finally received Western battle tanks from Germany and the UK. They're expected to beef up its armored firepower for a potential offensive in the spring. Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov gave a thumbs up as he took a ride in a British Challenger 2 battle tank, while German-made Leopard 2 tanks were also delivered. Now, before the long-awaited vehicles arrived, Ukraine had to rely on Soviet-made tanks. DW's correspondent Max Sunda met some of the crews in eastern Ukraine.
These men are farmers from the south. Now they belong to the most feared units on the battlefield. The Soviet-era T-80 takes 3 men to operate. At 40 tons and driven at speeds of up to 80 kilometers an hour, Gunner Vasil says the tanks scare the enemy.
I will tell you this, as soon as they see from the drones how the tanks are coming, then all the artillery is only aimed at us. They forget about the infantry, about everything, so they're afraid.
But the tanks need a lot of attention. This one is more than a decade older than the mechanic Ihores, and it shows.
If the tank is on really uneven ground, it's often this part of the tracks that breaks and needs to be replaced. Every now and again, we also have to tighten the tracks.
These tanks may be old and worn down, but they're easy to repair if the men can get the spare parts. They often find them on the battlefield.
Yes, many Russian parts fit our vehicles. We often dismantle Russian tanks for spare parts. The undercarriage is suitable, and often we find parts suitable for the engine.
At the start of the war, the Ukrainians seemed to be facing a superior tank force. But the Russians deployed those tanks often in a very risky way, without adequate protection from infantry or fighting vehicles. The Ukrainians were able to take out and capture close to 2,000 of those tanks. But they're saying now, if they are to have a chance of taking back territory, they would need a significant upgrade themselves. The men here are waiting for better tanks to arrive from friendly countries.
The new ones are more maneuverable. They have other equipment, thermal sights, rangefinders. Their crew is more protected. The ammunition capsule is placed at the back. When they shoot, the capsule flies out, but we don't. In our old tanks, we are sitting on a powder keg.
What he's actually sitting on is this: all the tank's ammunition. That can go horribly wrong when an old tank like this takes a direct hit. Tanks are seen as the key to a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive. The more old tanks that are destroyed, the greater the appetite for new, better ones.
Let's keep talking about these new, better tanks then. Max Sunda, who filed this report, joins me now from Kyiv. Max, Ukraine spent months pleading for modern Western battle tanks. Now they finally have their hands on them. What are the newer tanks seen, or why are they seen as crucial to this expected Ukrainian counteroffensive?
Right, Nico. So these tanks that Ukraine has been promised, that are now step-by-step being deployed to Ukraine, are some of the most modern battle tanks in the world, if not the most modern battle tanks in the world. They have far superior weapons. They are more maneuverable. The armament is better, so it's also safer for the crew to operate in these tanks. But apart from that, they are seen as a key to a successful counteroffensive if used in the right manner, in larger quantity. So the Ukrainians will need more tanks. But if they have them, the idea is that they could lead a counteroffensive if deployed properly in a proper manner, in the right constellation, with lots of tanks and with an overwhelming mechanized force, with proper surveillance, with infantry fighting vehicles, with infantry on the ground, and this could be all used to bring in the momentum and to push through enemy lines and in this case, hopefully for the Ukrainians, move the enemy lines that haven't been moved for the last couple of months so far.
But using them in the right manner is key, right? You said it there. How have Ukrainian soldiers been trained to operate these Western-made tanks?
Right, so Ukrainian soldiers have received training in Germany and in the UK, for example, but also successfully completed training in Spain on older Leopard models in March. And this training hasn't been done by the book as it usually would have been done. This was done in a rapid manner, and that is because these crews are quite experienced. I would say they're probably a lot more experienced in tank warfare than any instructor in Western Europe at the moment would be. So they don't have to learn all the basics, but they would learn the specifics about the individual tanks. These tanks are different. The T-80 that you saw in the report there has a 3-man crew. The Leopard, for example, has a 4-man crew. But they will be working on the specifics, and so far as we know, have completed or have been able to pick up these new skills very, very fast. And this is also partly due to their motivation that they have, that we also saw on the ground when we talked to these tank soldiers there.
Max, what about the Russians? Because much is being said about how many tanks they have lost. What are they taking to battle right now?
Right, so from what we know, Russia started this war with an overwhelming tank force. The Ukrainians had far inferior in terms of numbers of force, but the Russians were not able to deploy their tanks properly. They did not use these big constellations. They did not use them to their strategical advantage, and that's why the Ukrainians were able to pick them off pretty much one by one. Also with simple weapons deployed by the West with anti-tank weapons. So that's the situation at the moment, or with its how it has played out with the Russian tanks so far.
Max Sanda in Kyiv, thank you so much. Well, let's keep talking about these new, better tanks then with military analyst Frank Ledwich, who is joining me now. Good to see you again. Ukraine spent months pleading for modern Western battle tanks. Now they finally have their hands on them. Why are they believed to be so crucial to a Ukrainian counteroffensive?
Well, good morning, Nicole. We have to go back really to the Cold War. NATO, or the West, went much more on quality. The Russians or the Soviet side on quantity. So that meant, and you heard that from a lot of this from the tank crewmen there before, that these tanks that they're getting, which are much more modern, of course, than Cold War ones, are a step change in quality over their Russian predecessors and adversaries. So, for example, armoured protection. They are far more survivable on the battlefield. Equally importantly, and this was hinted at there, what's called fire control systems. So tanks can fight at night. NATO tanks will be able to fight at night. Even more importantly than that, they'll be able to engage Russian tanks, that's to say shoot at Russian tanks and destroy them before Russian tanks are in range. And they'll be able to do that at a very high rate. So we're looking at a step change in quality here. And from the tank crewman's perspective, as you heard there, that's utterly vital.
When it comes to operating these tanks, though, how different are the new Western tanks from the Soviet-era ones?
Right. So if you were to go inside a Russian tank, they're pretty rudimentary inside, except for the very latest ones, of which the Russians have very few. When you go inside a Western tank, you are encased in a huge amount of armor and steel, but essentially it's far more integrated in terms of its systems. And in other words, you need a lot more training to operate a NATO tank such as a Leopard 2 or a Challenger or especially an Abrams. So what the West has been focusing on, I think, over the last few months and will be till the end of the year, are training the crewmen. But equally important, and I say equally important, are the provision not only of logistics, supply and repair vehicles, and they're getting those, they're not so glamorous, let's say, but of course infantry fighting vehicles and armoured personnel carriers, and they're getting those as well, because you can't fight tanks alone. You need to have infantry with you. That's the mistake the Russians made earlier in the war.
Yeah. You talk about superior quality there, but there is also strength in numbers, isn't there? Do you expect these modern Western battle tanks to be enough, or does Ukraine need far more than what they're getting at this point?
It needs far more. The European Leopard providers have, so including especially Germany, have promised so far about 2 battalions worth of tanks. That's just over 100 tanks. The British very few, but very effective company worth. That's 14 tanks. Ukrainians aren't going to get that 100 tanks for all the fanfare. Probably they're not going to have 100 till autumn time. They've asked for 300. Tanks are much more effective used in bulk, and the way the Ukrainians want to use them, of course, in their counteroffensive is as a massive assault force. And there's an exponential effect in having large numbers. There's no point in having them in penny packets for various reasons. So they need a lot more, and they will continue to ask for a lot more, and they're right to do so.
Military analyst Frank Ledwich, thank you so much for those insights.
Thank you.